at the beginning, never be afraid to do some real work for free and showcase your skills, and just throw yourself in rooms where you have no business belonging. And, I've been able to do that most of my career, and I've had great mentors simply by being in boardrooms and other places where I really had no business at all.
Hello, and welcome back to the Business and Medicine podcast. We have a very exciting episode ahead of us. Today, we're talking to Dr. David Klein, who is a practicing academic critical care physician at Unity Health at the University of Toronto, well-published scientist and teacher at the Li Ka-shing Knowledge Institute, and experienced healthcare sector business leader. He is currently a member of the Health Sector Audit Board for the province of Ontario and is an operating partner at Searchlight Capital Partners, a transatlantic private equity fund managing over $10 billion in US dollars. In addition, in the life sciences, he has led clinical development and strategy in medical devices, diagnostics, and drug development as a consultant to over 20 companies. Dr. Klein has deep expertise in healthcare services globally and serves on the board of Care Advantage, a Virginia-based home care company, and is involved in research and investing in value-based care. He is an advisor in healthcare private equity to Imperial Capital Canada, venture capital to Santa Ventures in the US, and is a former management consultant and co-founder of the Canadian healthcare practice of McKinsey & Company. Welcome to the show, Dr. Klein. Thanks for being here today.
Great to be on the show. And again, great that you guys are doing this really impressive initiative.
Thank you. We appreciate it. So I think to start off, the listeners would like to learn a little bit more about what made you interested in the healthcare business space and how someone with a science educational background was able to get involved in a wide range of business ventures.
Yeah, so I'm the doctor's son of an accountant, and really the rest of my family are more in the business world and in the financial world. And, although I went to medical school and applied to medical school actually out of second year university, I'd been active in trading stocks and capital markets since I was 13 years old. And that was a contest in, I guess, junior high school. And my father said, hey, let's buy some of these stocks for real. And that really taught me about capital markets. And so ever since, really, my journey has been this convergence of business and medicine. And, I think I'd say the other side of it is, as someone who always aspired to do academic medicine, I was a lousy bench scientist. I set several labs on fire, and I really didn't want to be an epidemiologist. So I had to figure out something else I could do that would add value to an academic environment.
That's great to hear, and great to hear that you start at a young age. So, Dr. Klein, you seem to have a lot of different projects on the go. How do you manage to keep everything organized and moving forward in a logical way?
Well, I think the latter point on logical is a matter of debate. But yeah, I keep a lot of balls, and I think the important thing for me is when I'm doing clinical work, like now when I'm on in the intensive care unit, that is priority number 1, 2, and 3. And every business and organization that I'm involved with knows that and knows that, if there's a board meeting and I'm on call, well, sorry, what has to give is the business stuff. And the rest of it is about having an understanding family. And through critical care, I've chosen a subspecialty that does have a lot of flexible time in my non-clinical service weeks that allows me time to do other things. So, maybe the lesson for folks that are aspiring to spend a lot of time in other worlds is to think about a subspecialty that doesn't have a very intensive clinical component where you're really needing to follow your patients closely. And for me, I actually was originally sort of gunning for hematology oncology, turned down a fellowship in Boston at Dana-Farber because really I'd recognized that for me, I wanted this kind of hybrid career. And you just can't simply tell a cancer patient, I've got, a couple of meetings next week and I'll see you afterwards. That just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, especially for medical students who are kind of early on in their career, haven't chosen exactly what specialty they want to pursue and know that they have interest in these other areas to kind of guide their specialty decision in a way that may give them more flexibility for this kind of work. And I also liked how you mentioned you got into stocks early on. I remember we had the stock competition in grade 10 business class where you had, I think, $1 million fake dollars, and then the winner, whoever raised the most money, won the prize. And I think either got real stocks or was able to get some kind of prize of some sort. I think that actually did start my investing career too, got me into it. So on the note of investing, could you tell us a little bit more about your role with Searchlight Capital Partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So Searchlight is a really exciting place for me to work, and they have three offices: one in Toronto, one in New York, and one in London. And they were started by really three brilliant investors in their late 30s, early 40s, about 10 years ago. One of them was the founder of the Ontario Teachers Private Equity Group. Another was a senior investor from Apollo, one of the largest global firms, and the other built KKR, another large global private equity firm in Europe. And they were traditional media and telecom investors, but as they grew and realized their success, they continued to raise more money. And as they raised more money, they needed to diversify the fund for obvious sort of portfolio reasons. And so I was brought in 2 years ago to help them think about healthcare and build a healthcare practice, partnered with another colleague of mine there. And it's really amazing to be given a white piece of paper, unlimited resources in terms of money and support, and somebody just says, well, let's go out and find a place to spend $500 million in healthcare investment and help us make some money and do some good in healthcare. And so really, that was the task. And some of it got side railed with COVID, and certainly helping the firm navigate through, which became a good chunk of some of the work that I did for them. But we successfully executed our first investment in Care Advantage in the Virginia home care company, I guess about 6 months ago. And again, that's largely based on the thesis that care in the home is, instead of in hospital or other institutional settings, is going to be increasingly in a post-COVID world. So I think it's a perfect example of where you leverage your medical expertise in terms of understanding some of the key trends happening in the healthcare system out of COVID, and then your financial investing expertise to identify the right company in the right geography with the right characteristics to grow and execute for the fund.
And I have so many questions, just wanting to delve a little deeper into it. Can you tell us exactly kind of the process? You said they approached you 2 years ago to get on board. So I want to learn more about how you initially got started with them, and kind of how you went about learning more about valuing companies. And then also, do you target more healthcare startups that are within your field of specialty, or is it more broad within the healthcare field?
Yeah, so everything is an evolution in life, and I've been doing this for a long time. As you guys probably are aware, I also worked at McKinsey and developed a lot of skills around just understanding basic financial literacy and valuation, and that through McKinsey, through my MBA, subsequently at Kellogg and Northwestern, and then through 15 years working at Imperial Capital as well, doing other healthcare deals. But the important thing to recognize is, I'm not there to be the smartest guy in the room on finance. I'm there because I speak finance and I speak the language, but I'm not the guy who needs to build the model. I need to be able to pressure test the model and say, hey, these assumptions are right or they're wrong. But the model is left to the Harvard and Wharton MBAs, and investment bankers that work with me and work for me. And so that's kind of the important thing to recognize. I'd worked with Imperial for a long time and on a number of projects, and like most things that happen, and probably my next tidbit of advice around how to get involved in different specific sectors or different specific organizations is you typically will start working on a specific project. And they were looking at an investment in the health sector, just trying to toe their way in actually a public company. That investment, for a number of reasons, didn't happen. I actually never particularly liked that investment. But coming out of that, they said, hey, we like working with you. We like the way you work with us and the way your brain works. Let's continue this relationship. And that's how it really got started. So there's something to be said around starting off on a project and to risk a little bit of your time and not worry about getting paid for it early on, and use it as an opportunity both to learn whether you like who you're working with and the way they work, and to also showcase your skills and how they can become of value.
For sure. And just kind of building off of that idea of, reaching out and and seeing what opportunities are out there, Dr. Klein. Do you have any advice for our listeners as like how they could actually do that? Is it as simple as just sending an email and saying, "Hey, I'm a physician. I'm interested in diving into the private equity space." Do you have any opportunities out there?
I think it's pretty hard to get much traction with a $10 billion fund with a blind email. I think that there's a number of different ways you can start to get exposure and build exposure to the healthcare investing world. Particularly, there's a lot of startups that come out of the universities. There's a number of incubators that come out of the universities. I know that Western has a long-standing partnership, for example, with Waterloo. Waterloo has no medical school, but a tremendous healthcare engineering work that comes out and digital health work that comes out. And they're desperately in need of folks who can help understand where their ideas can best play in the healthcare context. And that's a great way to get early healthcare experience and exposure. So that may be one opportunity. In terms of others beyond that, through the business school, I had the opportunity. I got involved in private equity with a former colleague of mine from McKinsey, who was a pure finance guy, and he went on to Imperial Capital and to build and start healthcare at Imperial Capital, and so he reached out to me. So a lot of it's just leveraging your own network as well, or the network of your colleagues. But where I think physicians make mistakes is, as I said previously, being they think that their time value as physicians is they're the same as their time value in business, and the reality is you don't know very much about business at this stage, so it's going to take a while. And if you're expecting X $100 an hour or whatever it is as a business person because you're a doctor, well, you're probably not worth that yet. And you need to be there and learning and contribute. And at the beginning, never be afraid to do some real work for free and showcase your skills, and just throw yourself in rooms where you have no business belonging. And, I've been able to do that most of my career. And I've had great mentors simply by being in boardrooms and other places where I really had no business at all. I remember being a 25-year-old kid working at McKinsey with probably 15 of the most important business leaders in Canada, because I was working on a project merging the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Vancouver Stock Exchange at the time. And, I was serving coffee and flipping slides, but man, did it give me exposure to some of the most senior executives in the country. And that was really, really good exposure.
I think that's great advice. Just realizing that as a physician, you're not going to be an expert in the business field, especially if you didn't have business education beforehand, but just not being afraid to put yourself out there, learn as much as you can, and try to work your way up if this is a field that you're interested in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a ton you can do with it. There really is. The world's your oyster. And at some point, the opportunities come to you. You don't need to go and look for them. And I'm fortunate to be at that stage of life. So.
And now a word from our sponsor. This podcast is sponsored by OMA Insurance, the exclusive provider for the OMSA and the CFMS. Well over half of the medical students in Ontario choose and trust OMA Insurance because they are a wholly owned subsidiary of the Ontario Medical Association. As a not-for-profit and using the group buying power of well over half of Ontario physicians, OMA Insurance provides a wide range of insurance and retirement savings solutions for medical students, residents, and physician members. They have non-commissioned staff who offer objective advice, education, and solutions. OMA Insurance can help you prepare for the unexpected and help get you back on your feet when you need it the most. For instance, did you know that if you take more than 6 weeks off of medical school, you have to restart the year again? And if you're off for 6 months straight, the bank can start to ask for repayment on your line of credit. I personally have disability coverage with OMA Insurance. I got it because school is stressful enough, and I believe it can help keep me and my finances safe during times of uncertainty. Plus, it's affordable and super easy to enroll. Make sure you're protected, because if the last 2 years has taught us anything, it's that life can be very uncertain. OMA Insurance is there to protect you every step of the way. Go to omainsurance.com to learn more about our special offer and exclusive savings for students.
So you've obviously accomplished so much here. I'm just wondering, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when working in any of these business-related ventures that you've been a part of?
I think that there's an almost immediate discount factor that business people apply when a physician walks in the room, and that's always a challenge you need to overcome. I think when a doctor walks in the room, the business people are ready to sell you timeshares in swampland in Florida, and I remember being told early on I was going to meet a CEO of a healthcare company at the time, and we're actually great friends today. And my colleagues who sent me in to meet him said, listen, he doesn't really respect doctors very much. Don't be upset if he throws you out of the room in 20 or 30 minutes. And we don't want you to kind of take that too badly. And it turned out I stayed for 3 hours, and we're friends today, and we've done many collaborative deals. And so that's often a challenge. I guess the other challenge is getting over some of your own insecurities and being willing to be vaulted onto bigger stages. Doctors are very uncomfortable. Certainly I wouldn't want to do an operation that I'd never been trained to do or something like that. But in business, you're not going to kill anybody. And so you need to be willing to step into situations and rooms where you may or may not have very much experience and just be willing to learn. I recently, and it wasn't on my CV, but for example, I got nominated to the board of a large public healthcare real estate company that's global. And, we have $10 billion in public global healthcare asset. And I actually don't really know a ton about real estate. I know a lot about healthcare, not a ton about real estate. And so, there's acronyms that I don't know, and it's a high pressure room with a lot of really smart people, but hey, I ain't going to kill anybody. So we'll bring it on.
That's awesome. Would you say that there's any aspects of your medical training that kind of helped you navigate these challenges?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that medicine is extremely good at, and certainly my own field of critical care is extremely good at, is teaching you the importance of making decisions with incomplete information. That some percentage of patients that you operate on with appendicitis will have a normal appendix, or some percentage of patients that you give thrombolysis to for myocardial infarction may have some other diagnosis, and you may be wrong, and sometimes that may not turn out so well. But that ability to really prioritize what information you need, what information is most important, and then make a decision with incomplete information, I think is a really, really important skill, and one that actually I think medicine probably teaches more than business.
That's great. I think being able to make those decisions with limited information is something that medicine provides a lot of experience in and a lot of opportunities. Kind of going on a different note here, I noticed that you did have an MBA, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about what made you pursue an MBA, kind of what point at your training you did the MBA, and do you think it's helped you in these business ventures?
Yeah, so let me answer all those questions sort of in sequence. So the first question is what made me do an MBA. I think a big part of it was that branding issue, right? The fact that I wanted to be at a minimum on a level playing field when I went into a business, in terms of people thinking that I at least maybe knew something about business versus just the MD that they were selling timeshares to. The other thing was I did want to pursue an academic career at the University of Toronto, which aware of certainly they require some graduate degree as part of your non-clinical core expertise. And so it was important for that perspective. And then timing, I actually did it immediately after I finished my subspecialty training. So I almost did it as a 6th year of subspecialty training, or extra year and a half of subspecialty training, because that was the right time for me to do it, to sort of round out my training as I started my academic career. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be done at that point. I have many colleagues who've done it earlier, so, some who do it later. Doing it later is challenging if you're trying to balance family and other things. But for me, it's been beneficial because certainly in Canada, it puts you in a fairly narrow spectrum of individuals who have that dual training. It's probably no different than asking an MD, PhD who runs a lab why they did the PhD. They could have gotten away without it, but
Absolutely. And you said you did it right after your subspecialty training. So for the residents out there that are listening in, would you say that there are any skills that they should start to think about gaining before pursuing an MBA?
Look, the more context you have going into an MBA, having even work on the side on a few little startup projects or other advisory roles, it's always going to be helpful to you because it's going to give you context. Most MBA students have a couple of years of business work experience versus the physician colleagues who may not. And so to the extent that you can get, whether it's administrative experience in a hospital because that's something you're interested in, or working with startups or other things, it's just going to give you context so that when the professor says, does this case remind you of anything that you've seen in your career, you can say, well, I remember when my hospital merged with another hospital and it was a complete freaking disaster because of X, Y, and Z, and the cultures were different or whatever else it was.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. When I was doing my master's in finance, it was a lot of case-based learning, and having that background experience that you can draw on and bring and contribute to the case in a meaningful way would definitely be a benefit to the class. Thank you.
I think it's interesting how you kind of did the MBA as a way to become more of the academic physician to get those credentials. As you mentioned at U of T, most physicians would need that higher level education to become an academic physician. And I'm sure your interest in finance early on in your life also helped spur that choice to pursue the MBA. I'm wondering, for those who aren't interested in academic medicine, but maybe are more geared towards pursuing some of these things that you pursued in your career, would you say that an MBA is a smart thing to consider if maybe they want to go that route rather than academic medicine?
Yeah, look, particularly if it's something that you're going to make your entire career. If you're saying I never want to practice and I just want to be a management consultant or something like that, I think it's a worthwhile degree to do and to have. I mean, ultimately, my goal isn't to create a whole bunch of disgruntled physicians who want to drop out of medicine and go work in management consulting or finance or pharma. My goal is to create a group of young physician leaders that are going to continue to be very engaged in medicine. I hope you do practice for a significant period of time because I think it provides really, really important context for the work that you do and the types of questions that you're going to answer. And so I think that excellence on both sides is really important. And probably, the piece of advice, and this is typically my ending piece of advice, but the piece of advice I offer, any medical student or resident is, before you worry too much about being great in business, make yourself the best doctor you can be. Because at the end of the day, your credibility and your first line of credibility is always going to come through being a great physician and a great physician colleague. And so, nobody is, they won't say, oh, he's a mediocre doctor, but he's great at finance, so let's keep him around. You really need to be excellent and a leader in your day job. And so, if the choice is to do 10 more central lines that night versus, build the financial model, put the lines in, because, now I don't have to anymore because I've done 1,000 or 5,000 or whatever I've done.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think anyone as a physician going into one of these companies, one of these business ventures, your biggest asset is your healthcare experience and your knowledge as a physician. Thank you, Dr. Klein. Kind of on a final note there, I was reading through some of the things that you were involved with. I noticed that one of your professional interests is system and physician funding models. And I'm wondering if you think that there will be any changes to the physician funding models in the future, possibly from fee for service to value-based or bundled payment methods.
Yeah, absolutely. So I sit on the audit board for the province of Ontario. So we oversee all of the spending in the health sector. And I think if you look around the world, it's very clear that there are really strong secular trends around moving to value-based care models and away from fee-for-service. There are ongoing discussions at the University of Toronto, at the University of Western Ontario, and a number of others about developing a more holistic AFP model and then ultimately creating that AFP model in a way that's more value-based. So that will happen in your career. There's absolutely no question about it. What it looks like, what will enable it, what will drive it, it's hard to say. But we're moving closer and closer to it every day. We've already seen it in family practice. with the FIGs and the FOs and various capitated models. And there are already a number of AFPs that exist in Ontario. So yes, it's coming. What will it look like? Hard to say, but you will definitely be in a different model 20 years from now than you're in today.
I always find it interesting, with healthcare becoming so expensive, I know that there must be changes coming along the way. So I knew I had to get your thoughts there. So I know you provided already that great tidbit for our listeners, but I wanted to provide you a last minute for any final thoughts for the medical students and residents listening in.
Just be great. Just love what you do, be excellent at what you do, whether that's business, medicine, science, teaching. Medicine is such a gift and such a unique window into the world that is so transferable anywhere in the world. I am so excited that there are groups like this one that are really trying to make a difference and create a whole generation of physicians that are really going to have impact in very different ways than existed when I started my career. So just stay at it and be committed and make a difference, and the world will be your oyster.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Klein, for taking the time to be here and sharing your expertise. I really appreciate it.